ladies and gentlemen. So, welcome to the York Festival of Ideas. Actually, this is the last event in this year's sequence, so I hope you enjoy it. So, my name is John McDermid. I'm going to be chairing the event today, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here. I'm also delighted to acknowledge support from the French Embassy in the UK, who have co-organised this session and have contributed to other events in this year's Festival of Ideas. So let me now turn to this evening's topic. I'm an engineer and I've worked on safety for many, many years. So I actually see positive aspects of AI for the future of work. In many cases, AI can be embedded in products, robots or autonomous systems, and can take workers out of harm's way. For example, in nuclear waste reprocessing or in maritime applications. But AI has a much, much wider impact, including on white-collar jobs such as lawyers and, dare I say it, academics, has potential to bring benefits, but it's also able to dramatically change the nature of jobs, or perhaps to eliminate them altogether. In fact, in the last few days, Sam Altman was saying that he believes AI will eliminate whole classes of jobs, but will actually introduce new classes of jobs as well. Actually, in many ways, that wouldn't be inconsistent with what has happened during earlier technological revolutions. So I think this is a fascinating, timely, and crucial topic, which fortunately our panelists are much, much better qualified to talk about than I am. I shall introduce them one by one, starting with Anna Thomas, who's been asked to give a brief overview of the issues as well as presenting her own view of the topic. So Anna Thomas, MBE to my right, is the founder and co-director of the Institute for the Future of Work. She was formerly a barrister specialising in employment law and appointed a counsel to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and as head of policy for the Future of Work Commission, as fellow of the IPR and the RSA. Anna, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, and for having me at the wonderful Festival of Ideas. I am here because I think a Festival of Ideas is such a wonderful idea. And I would really like to talk to you today about the idea of good work in the context of AI. And because it's after hours and it's after 6, I'm going to indulge myself with a slightly more personal perspective on the experience of good work and impacts on good work and why it's important in the age of AI, and combine that with an overview of what's happening. The personal perspective, I hope, will allow me to zoom in and zoom out, so go big and go small, which I do find is helpful in catalysing ideas and reflecting about them, and enabling new ones to surface on my own, but usually with others. A little bit, first of all, about the Institute for the Future of Work. We're an independent, non-profit research and development institute exploring the impact of AI and automation technologies on work and society. And our aim is that everybody can flourish through the new technological revolution. And our theory of change, our hypothesis, if you like, which is increasingly backed up by research, is that focusing on good work and impacts on good work, and also aiming for good work, is a really good way, possibly the best way, to do this, to get to a place where everyone is flourishing through the new technological revolution, in the sense of both understanding the impacts that we know about, and allowing those that we don't know about to surface, and also in the sense of mediating better outcomes from things that are happening at the moment. So we think it's always been very important, but it's particularly important now in the age of Gen AI. We know that AI and automation technologies are behind a massive structural transformation of the economy, what we would call 5.0. So we've had 4 technological revolutions in the past, and I think it's reasonable, it's a good idea to think about this as 5.0. And it's changing things at a systems level, like rewiring labour markets, for example, and the creation and access to jobs, at a firm level, at a sort of middle meso level, as there are new business models that come to light, and driving the creation of value and the extraction of value in different ways. And also it's affecting us at an individual level. So what we do every day, how we experience work, how our work is changing, how our deployment and use of our skills are changing, and how we are relating with AI as well. That's having many different types of impact. The pace we know is picking up. So we know that empirically, research that we've done with our university partners suggests that, for example, we know that 80% of SMEs were using AI and automation technologies to automate cognitive as opposed to physical tasks, and even before the latest wave of Gen AI. We know that most workers from our worker survey were claiming that they interacted with AI, even again before the latest wave of AI, and even when many people don't know exactly when they're interacting with it or what it's doing. And we also know from our machine learning clustering analysis that we've done with Imperial Maths Department, that the skills that we're using, which is another way of thinking or understanding about automation, what skills are being engaged and how they're being used in sort of networks and groups of skills are changing really fast. And that's happening, we can understand that, beneath the surface of the headline statistics, which don't always look that dramatic. But what's happening underneath those is because it's changing the nature, quality, and conditions of work. Anecdotally, we also know, we're hearing, as are many others of our partners hearing, that it's a bit like the elephant in the room, in that most firms, as well as people, are really experimenting without full understanding of what the impacts are. Employers, for example, often don't know, haven't thought about anticipating the impacts, and they don't know how their employees are using it. And employers too may be using it without telling their employers. And there are new kinds of sort of relationship issues and trust issues that are happening now. These are just going to be examples of things that are happening. People are also using it in entirely different ways, and and there aren't ways yet to sort of systematically share and think about that together, how that's happening. And often in silos, so different departments in firms and organisations, HR departments, legal departments, IT departments, aren't often talking to each other, or not in the same language that can be understood. And as a result of all that, as we'll be hearing more about, the more complicated or social impacts, beyond the ones that are more normally understood within the realm of safety and security, for example, or other impacts, secondary impacts, relation impacts, and hidden impacts, are not systematically being examined. And we're having to think about getting new systems in place to anticipate these impacts and share information about these impacts, both from an innovation and a governance point of view. And we think very much that good innovation and good governance go together. It also means that there's a lot of work for us, and this is where the personal story gets in terms of both the subject matter and how we're going about it. So I'm constantly feeling as if there's an endless number of things and notes that I've not managed to respond to, or emails properly. I've got this constant sense that my task is not done, which I know from learning about job design is important and difficult. And yet at the same time, because I have ADHD, I sometimes get the sense in using ChatGPT, which I do personally, that it can give me very personalised advice about how to manage that in a way that is unusual and I've not experienced before. Why work? Why in this context is work important to focus on? We have to start somewhere, and work is a site which is a site of our everyday interaction with AI. It's where people interact with AI as workers, as innovators and creators, also as citizens and members of society. And in a sense, it's a non-representative sample of society, and it's where the innovation happens. And it's a sort of intuitive site. It's almost intuitive and natural to think about it as where you can begin to conceive of different levels of impact, sort of labour market impacts, systematic impacts, firm-level impacts, and individual impacts. And indeed, early thinking about socio-technical systems, how AI works with humans and interacts with humans, was founded in the site of work in the long war method of gathering coal. Why is good work particularly important? It's a framework, a good work framework, for sharply focusing on the things that we really do know are changing, and allowing us to measure and anticipate those things and surface those things that we don't yet know. It's also, our research suggests, from different disciplines, it mediates often better outcomes, and there are a number of reasons for this, from hard economics to softer, in a sense, psychological impacts. It captures good rights, it captures the law and rights in soft law and hard law, and it also is thinking about good work is a way of translating AI principles, transparency, accountability, and so on, to the workplace in a way that we can grasp and understand, and thinking about making it better for everybody.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the speakers before we turn to questions. And actually, I'd like to introduce Édouard Havis, who's a project leader for program IA, if that's the correct pronunciation, AI in France, at Inria, one of the major French research labs. He's worked there since 2021, and current role is assisting in preparing and executing projects, working closely with French ministers, teams to align technical, scientific, and budgetary aspects. But I think this sort of link to policy is really very important. Before his current role, he worked with the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, supporting organisation events, workshops, managing budgets, etc. So if we don't do this very well, you'll tell us how to do it better next time. Édouard, over to you.
So I wanted to say you did an amazing job, and way better than what I did in the past, so really congratulations on that. LaborIA, so my team, it is a co-project, co-funded between Inria, so my employer, my family, and the Ministry of Labor. What they wanted to do, it was to have a view on what was happening at work with AI, because we didn't know where we were going. And so the idea of the first phase of LaborIA from 2022, when we started, when they started, I wasn't in the team in that time. From 2022 to 2024, for 2 years, it was really on looking at what was going on and getting some results. I'm so sorry, everything is in French, so you will have to put everything copy-paste on ChatGPT. I don't know exactly how you will do it because I don't do it myself. I don't need it for that. And so the idea was really to look into what was happening. And then since 2024, the beginning of last year, it was to monitor and to help working groups around certain topics. So we have topics on industry, AI industry, which is a good topics, a good field for us because industry, you have a lot of money in investment in R&D, and so they already started, even before you are aware of ChatGPT, I guess. You watch the news from time to time, so you saw that since it was November 2023, that now it's totally democratized. You can use it, really, you can try it. For the moment, it's free, so don't feel free to use it. But before that, it was mainly solutions, AI solutions, brought by the management. So it was the boss of the company who wanted to improve, to increase the productivity. And so thanks to this field, that field of industry, we are able today to deep dive into use cases of a solution that has already lived a little bit. Sometimes a solution that is still living, sometimes a solution that doesn't exist anymore. It's like when you see the stars, sometimes you see the star, but it doesn't exist anymore because yes, for some reasons, some solutions are not applicable on the field. So there is the industry. It was way too long for just one working group. I will be quicker for the other one. Another on industry, culture, and all that is linked to creations. It is our second one. It is totally the opposite compared to the first one, to industry, because in those last years, in the 2010, things like that, we were thinking that AI were mainly targeting the repetitive and that didn't require creation tasks. But we saw that with ChatGPT, it's not the case. So it's a field that is very new, and for that, it's also interesting for us to deep dive into it. And then other working group topics are around recruitment. So when you hire to post things like that, to inclusivity. another one on inclusivity. And next to that, so this is the work we do with the Ministry of Labor. And then next to that, we also have my colleagues, my researchers' colleagues, they are doing an amazing job. Elo, Juana, Kenza, and all of the rest of the team, and Sophie, Stephanie, and they are doing an amazing work. And they they conduct field study, field enquête terrain, with workers of all that is related to custom, control, taxes. It's very important in France. And the two others, the rest of the team, is mainly focused on the social workers. And in France, the social workers represent 1 million of people. And so it's very important for us also to deep dive into those jobs.
Thank you, Édouard.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And so turn to my left now. So the panelist is going to bring us a rather different perspective. David Stillwell is Professor of Computational Social Science, an academic director of the Psychometrics Centre at the University of Cambridge. His research uses big data to understand psychology. I'm told he's shown that computers can predict a user's personality as accurately as their spouse can, which is kind of scary if that's true. Provides consultancy on the topics of psychometrics, people analytics and big data, particularly to government, and has worked with many companies, including Amazon, Barclays, Hilton Hotels, RBS, Shell, and Ubisoft. So I think, David, over to you for an interesting perspective. Thanks.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. As I say, I'm at a business school, but my research is about people, about understanding people and the differences between them. But then more recently, some of the AI companies have come to us and said, well, we've developed something that's a bit like a person. Can you tell us who this thing is? You know, does ChatGPT have a personality? And it does. It acts in a very consistent way, in the way that humans do. Indeed, if you tell it to be a certain personality, it will act like that personality in the way that a human extrovert would act like that personality. So I bring sort of two bits of experience to this. So one of them is we're doing research on applying psychometric tests that we would normally do with people, but to AI instead. So we're looking at what capabilities does it have, and I'll come back to that in a second. And also I teach generative AI to various business people. So we run courses for executives about generative AI specifically, and about 150 executives have come through these courses in groups of 20 or so. So I'm sort of seeing through those courses how the business people are looking at generative AI and what are the opportunities of it. Very briefly, I thought I'd ask you a question. Imagine where we are today, right? A quick show of hands, who's used a large language model like ChatGPT in the last 7 days? All right. So it looks like about 80% of people here, right? So here's the question, right? If you haven't used, then maybe this question won't make sense. But if you have, here's the question. So where do you think we'll be in 7 years' time with AI capabilities? All right, so here's 3 options, right? So 7 years' time. Option number 1 is that AI will give you an answer to your question that is as good as an average human, right? Whatever question you ask, it will be like the AI gives you a response that is as good as an average human response. All right, that's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2 is whatever question you ask, you'll get a response that is as good as the best human. Right? So you'll ask your legal question, and it'll be like talking to the best lawyer in the world that specializes in that topic. Right? Or your medical question, it will be like talking to the medical specialist on that topic, or to the maths professor with your maths question. All right, that's scenario number 2. Scenario number 3 is you'll get an answer that's better than the best human in the world. Right? This is like superhuman AI. Right? So at that point, it will be unethical to talk to a doctor, because the AI will give you a better response. So those are 3 scenarios, right? Average human, expert human, superhuman. 7 years' time, right? So I'm not asking you about 40 years' time. I'm asking 7 years. What do you think is most likely? All right, so quick show of hands. Who says scenario number 1, kind of average human response? All right, I haven't prepped this with the camera people, so they're probably very grumpy right now. So it looked like about 10%, I would say. Who says scenario number 2? This is expert human. All right, so more expert human, so probably 40% maybe, all right. And superhuman? All right, and a good sort of 20% there for superhuman. So let's take those last two, right? Expert human, superhuman. If you really believe that, right, 7 years' time, absolutely massive impacts on society, work, all of this stuff. Like, you know, even if it's like, why do we need doctors, right? You talk to a doctor, you get the best doctor in the world, right? Or you might get better than the best doctor in the world. Absolutely massive, you know, if you really believe that. And plenty of people in AI would say, well, you know, that is what we expect to happen. You know, Google DeepMind has got a course where they teach people about AI safety. And video number 1, part 1, is on we are on a path to superhuman capabilities. Right? That's the name of the video. It's not are we on a path, or we could be, or one day we're on a path. You know, it's we are on a path to superhuman capabilities. So, you know, my point is this is absolutely massive. You know, I'm not a historian or sociologist or sort of big picture thinker, but you know, we need to start thinking on that kind of level about the social impacts. Just to bring it back to me, I mean, we're doing research on what are called 21st century skills. So this includes things like problem solving, creativity, critical thinking, and something about social ability, I think. So these were things that in the 21st century, the OECD said we need to teach kids these 4 things because these are the key skills for the 21st century. You know, plenty of people still say, well, you know, we need to teach kids critical thinking because AI isn't very good at critical thinking, or it's not very good at creativity. We apply tests that we apply to humans and then apply them to AI, and the AI, you know, even right now, already is at least like the 50th percentile. Right? It's at least giving you average human creativity, critical thinking, problem solving. And these are the models from a couple of years ago when we did this research, right? So today's models will be even better. So it's not clear to me what the uniquely human skill will be that says, well, we need to teach kids to do this because AI will never be able to do it. Let me stop there.
David, thank you. That's a good stimulus. But I'll turn to our fourth panelist, my colleague David Beer, before we turn to questions. So, David's a professor of sociology at the University of York. His work explores how transformations in technology and media reshape culture and society. I think will resonate very well with what the other David has said. His focus is often on questions of power. Amongst other things, this included work on the politics of data and metrics, the social power and influence of algorithms, the tensions between AI and the dynamics of social media. Alongside this, he works on the history and future of social thought, with a focus on imagine, creativity and inspiration, which I think will be a nice complement to what we've heard so far. David, over to you.
Thank you, yes. I just wanted to start by going back to 1946 and George Orwell's essay, Some Thoughts on the Common Toad. And this was about 2 years before George Orwell wrote 1984. And he said this, and he's talking about the toad, but he says this. A prevailing idea at the time, he says, is that this is the age of machines, and that to dislike the machine or even to want to limit its domination is backward-looking, reactionary, and slightly ridiculous. So what Orwell was observing in 1946 has been like ramped up over the years. And there's a kind of pressure to appear algorithmic for organisations, or to be algorithmic, which is to be ever smarter, considered ever smarter, ever more perceptive, anticipatory, predictive. And this is a kind of expectation that's placed upon us in different ways and placed upon the organisations that we're a part of. Now, in the face of AI, one of the things we could do is go back, retreat to the idea of the human. Now, the problem with that is it's been a long time since we could consider the human to be a kind of separate entity. We're already embedded deeply into algorithmic and data structures that extend our cognitive abilities through those systems. We're already part of what Catherine Ailes has called a cognitive assemblage. Our thinking is part of these systems already, and that will continue to change over time. So, over the last 3 years, I've been working on a project with colleagues at York, funded by the Nuffield Foundation, where we've looked at the housing sector. And I just want to call upon that research to give you a couple of insights into, as Anna talked about, the experience of work and the expansion of algorithmic or automated decision-making into different types of work, which is what we found when we looked closely at the housing sector. And there's interviews with 122 people from across different parts of the housing sector. Now, the first thing is that what we find is the kind of tensions that emerge, what Minna Ruckenstein's called the sort of frictions that occur when you integrate automated forms of decision-making into the workplace. And what happens is you get people wanting to defend their expertise, wanting to defend established positions and practices, their status, their ability to make a good decision. These things start to become barriers to the expansion of these forms of... So the pressures to become algorithmic clash with these kind of confidence deficits, we call them, a lack of confidence in the system. So when you look closely at people's workplaces, what we found is a form of what we called automation hesitancy, which is that people actually aren't sure. There's a great deal of uncertainty that occurs when there's the presence of these algorithmic, AI, machine learning systems in their lives. They're not quite sure how to integrate them or what the best way to do is, but they have a very strong sense that in the future they will be more algorithmic, they will be more automated. So there's a kind of automation hesitancy, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of variation in how people apply these, even within the same sector. The second thing is, AI is going to change how we work, but the models of AI are also going to change how we understand work in the first place. So the way we conceptualize and understand what work is altering. So what we found when we looked closely is the word manual kept appearing in the descriptions of the systems people were applying when they were making decisions. These are automated decisions about whether to allow people to be tenants or give people mortgages. And what we found was the word manual had been reanimated by the presence of AI. And people were using the notion of manual to demarcate the human parts of the system. So as they were trying to make sense of what algorithms could do or couldn't do, they sort of brought back older notions of the manual and manual work to defend or keep human decision-making within the loop. Now, I just wanted to turn to another literary figure to finish off. And last year I was working on an investigation into J.G. Ballard, the novelist J.G. Ballard's commissioning of computer-generated poetry in the 1970s. So I started looking at the poems, and they are absolutely awful. They're really bad. But then as I looked into this, I found that Ballard had written a short story about computer-generated poetry in the 1960s. And in the world he imagined, machines were writing poetry for humans. And all the poets had to do was turn the dials on their VT machine, and out would come endless amounts of poetry. Somebody smashed up all those machines, and the poets discovered they could no longer write poetry. But this is one of the comments from somebody who worked with the Imagine Literary magazine editor in the story, said this: 50 years ago, a few people wrote poetry, but no one read it. Now no one writes it either. The VT set merely simplifies the whole process. Now there's a kind of, if those that know Ballard's work, it's kind of soaked in a kind of really cold irony, this idea. But I think what Ballard is doing there, both when he wrote this story and when he started commissioning computer-generated poetry in the 70s, was a kind of warning to think, to be cautious about the type of things, where we automate, what we automate. Automation and the application of AI will continue, and we should accept that, but we might also want to reflect on the kind of warnings that Orwell and Ballard give us about the limits and where we might want to apply AI and what consequence it might have for what we do, how we think, and how we relate to each other.
Thank you very much, David, and thanks to the other panelists too. So I was going to start by asking the panelists one question, then turn over to the audience. So you've got a few minutes to think of some questions. I'm sure you've had much stimulus to do that. But actually, I'd like to pick up really on this point of creativity to start with, and actually ask the panelists if they're optimistic about AI making jobs, more rewarding, more interesting, or if they're pessimistic, they will reduce the scope for creativity and other forms of satisfaction that we get from work, rather than the way that Dave's just been describing with the poetry. But I agree with you, communitarian poetry is terrible. But so maybe that's not such a big risk. But Anna, do you want to start on that? And I shall then turn to your colleagues.
I'm happy to, and that's an excellent and very important question. I would say that the answer is both, and that the same technologies can have both positive and negative impacts, and that they usually are actually positive and negative impacts, and that there will be sort of a series of trade-offs that we have to think about. Can I go a bit further?
Of course.
Yes. So thinking of two sort of more easy to access examples. So technology that allows us to work remotely, that may give us more flexibility. It may also impact more groups more than others. So it may impact perhaps that people are young or people that are transitioning jobs more than others. But it might at the same time impact some types of innovation and relationship, and it might make us feel lonely. So that's one example. So another example is intensification. So when often nudged or encouraged by an algorithmic system, as we've heard about, some tasks will be wrapped up and parcelled, and instructions will be given to make it shorter and sharper and faster. So in a good world, partly that may automate dull, dangerous tasks that we don't want to do, and that's good. But at the same time, it may make some of the ones that are remaining harder and faster. And we don't know what will happen with the space that happens is very much a human choice. So it's really important, we'd say, going back to, I suppose, what I was saying before, to think about it systematically. You can't really understand this without thinking about it in the round and thinking about the different types of impact. Set up processes to understand that and think about the trade-offs more carefully and aim for what we want. So the really ultimately, the augmenting technology and humans working together really well and augmenting human capabilities and prioritising that and human choices over just rolling out wonderful technological ones.
Thank you. That's very interesting. If I may, Édouard, I'll go to that end first and then come back to you. So David, since you raised the question about creativity, how do you perceive the likely impact?
Yeah, there was an interview with the novelist Colin Toybin a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that the idea that there's any kind of distinctly human thing in creativity will be eradicated. That AI will be able to increasingly replicate that thing. And I think he was being quite provocative, I think, at the time, because clearly there are things you can return to as a notion of kind of human creativity that you might, at the moment, compare and contrast with the abilities of AI systems and defend. But they aren't necessarily going to persevere as distinctions between human and AI creativity of different types. But I think what this creates is actually what Anna's pointed us towards, which is, at the same time, these things create tensions that are unresolvable. So wherever you get the application of AI, you get the tensions of that algorithmic thinking. So you get these kind of pull us in different directions at the same time. So wherever you apply AI, I think there will always be tension. There will always be those tensions that are unresolvable. And creativity is one of those areas, I think, particularly as in creativity we'll come to doubt what has been created by a human and what has been created by the machine anyway, which is what you're already seeing in music and art and photography and so on. That notion of the creator or the author starts to break down even further.
Thank you, that's very interesting. So David, you were proposing a rather different model where it could potentially just replace the human functions altogether. But do you want to think about a situation where actually AI is being used to augment or to complement what people are doing?
So there was I'll take the sort of negative view. There was a paper that looked at basically who's better, right? Doctors or AI, right? So you've got doctors by themselves, how did they perform? Then you've got AI by itself, how does that perform? And then you've got doctors and AI together, right, as a combination. How do they perform? All right, so I've done it before. I won't get you to do hands again, but I've done it with groups, and you say, oh, which one do you think would be the best? And people say, oh, it's doctor and AI together, right? And the worst would be doctors and then AI and then doctors and AI. It didn't find that, right? So doctors were the worst, AI was better, and doctors and AI were worse, right? So the doctor only made things worse, right? It's like the AI said you should do this, the doctor was like, no, I disagree, just made things worse. Right? And this wasn't one study, like it's been something like 7, 8 studies started to find this consistently. There was a story at the beginning of Gen AI where it was like, well, we all need to learn how to use AI so that we can take the strengths from both and work together. And like studies like that start to make me worry that maybe that's not the story, right? Maybe the story is we only make things worse. Right? And this combination doesn't work out. I hope that's not the case, but it is a possibility.
Well, thank you. That's an interesting perspective. And Édouard, perhaps come to you last, and then we turn over to the audience.
So the question, please.
Oh, yeah, to answer that question, yeah.
So about whether if it augments...
whether it will, actually you think AI will actually improve people's jobs, it will be better because of it, or whether it will make them worse, more mundane, take away opportunities for creativity?
From what we saw at LaborIA, all depends on the dialogue you have with the worker, defining the AI system. Right. For instance, it was, I don't remember the name of the company, but it was a company checking in planes in order to do maintenance. And it was exactly the same work, but two different teams. But it was not the same management. With one team, there was a good communication. The worker was aware of why it could help, and in another, it was less peaceful. And so we saw really a big difference between both cases. So I think that as long that human is in the loop since the beginning, when I think of the human, it's not that the management is not human. It's still human beings. But I think that as long that soon enough you put them in the loop, at least you can say stop at the moment. Say just you're going in the wrong direction. So I think that's really a big component. So I won't say I have no idea. If you want to put AI in a company, I don't know what to tell you. It depends if you goes well with your colleagues.
Thank you very much. So I'd very much like to, draw in the audience. So maybe there's some particular questions people have, or maybe some responses to some of the comments. There's a gentleman here to start with. Just wait for the microphone, so then we'll be able to hear you properly. There's a lady appearing. There we go.
Anna, in your presentation, you said 2 or 3 times, you used the expression good work. What's your definition of good work in the context of AI?
David, you want to respond to that? Oh, over here. Oh, sorry, no, sorry.
We have actually got a good work charter which has 10 dimensions of good work. It's pulled together from lots of sources, and initially it was done from lit reviews in an expert group. It's changing, and it might be that we should need to update it at some point. But I'm going to try and remember now. It's access to work, which probably now these days would include substitution. Yeah. Pay, fair pay, terms and conditions of work.
Okay.
I'm not going to remember all of them. Equality, dignity, autonomy, support, participation, and learning. Anyone better at maths than me? I think. So they capture, we'd say, the sort of AI principle, higher level normative principles, but in AI, in many AI principles, including the UK's. But also legal rights or regulatory rights and norms, including human rights, both soft and hard, and national and international. There's a toolkit on the website if you want to have a look.
Okay, thanks. Édouard?
Yes, are you talking about the fair work principle? The fair work principle from the Oxford Internet Institute? Maybe it's that.
No, we know them, they're partners, it's not exactly the same.
Not exactly
but I think they did some work for GPA actually.
Yes, exactly.
But it's entirely
because
consistent.
I was there.
Yeah, it's entirely consistent with that.
see.
So our chair, Amore, was also, I think, part of that. So it's coming in at a slightly different angle, and it can be used in this way, the systems, firm and individual sense. But it should be, it's an umbrella charter that should absolutely include and incorporate the fair work.
Exactly, it is totally included. It's a great question, yours, because what they did, they did those 10 fair work principles. I think it was in 2022 or something like that, in the UK. And then the year after, they did that, but in another geography. And they wanted to use the same, but of course, when you change the geography, the parameters were not totally the same. It was, for instance, so it was first in the UK, then it was in developing countries. And so what was considered fair was to have a contract, a security where you were sure to have a minimum of length. And so, of course, it is, when you say at least fair work for where I was, it depends on where you are.
It's a really good point that it includes, in a way, both objective and subjective aspects, and one's experience and views about it, and what's most important will vary.
Interesting. Gents, any further comments, or shall we take the next question from the floor? There's a lady just behind you there, the row back. There we go. And then we'll go to the back next if we can. Sorry, I'll come to this side of the room in a minute if there are any. Madam.
Hi. I work in the education and skills sector, and I work a lot with AI, and I've been to a lot of AI and EdTech events recently. And a theme is emerging for me in that when panellists talk about the future of work, the future of skills, the future of society, it's really difficult to describe it because we have some ideas about where it's going to go, but we can't really envisage it yet. And therefore, it's very difficult to give advice back to other people about what they need to be doing. I'd be interested in what the two Davids have to say about whether they've got any models of containment, thinking about the AI and ethics side of things. What can we do to ensure that we're the overseers in that sense of the systems, not the other way around?
Interesting. So, David, did you? The two Davids,
Which
maybe?
David?
To start? Yeah.
I'll say some things. I entirely agree that projecting the future is incredibly difficult. It's one of these things where we can imagine this happening or that happening, but then the combinations of things all coming together will be what sends us off in a completely different direction that we don't expect. My current advice to policymakers when they come and say, how should we control these things? What laws should we bring in? This kind of stuff. Is first of all, I say, number one, I'm glad I don't have your job. But then I say, for me, because it's so difficult to predict the future, and because we're not sure where this AI is going to go, what is important is to lay the groundwork, make those connections with the businesses, use Gen AI yourself in your organization so that your people really understand it. Set up all these connections so that when something goes wrong, then you're able to intervene a lot faster than policymakers normally do. So for me, it's about setting things up so that they can be agile and have speed, rather than, I'm not a fan of the EU AI Act that they brought in because I feel like they've tried to guess what AI will be, and it's not going to be quite like that. And they've said some things are not allowed where maybe people would actually say, well, that kind of thing should be allowed. So I think they've tried to predict too much. So I suggest a sort of a, not wait and see, but wait and be ready.
Yeah, I think the stuff about the futures on this stuff is really interesting because there's research about sort of Annette Mark who's done this project where she's looking at kind of this idea of an inevitable future attached to AI. And there's a lot of kind of sense within the tech sector of being able to project a future that's inevitable to us, and that's quite difficult to challenge in many ways, which I think was kind of captured a bit by the Orwell quote that I gave. So at the same time, though, you've got that kind of quite a sense of a certain future, but to me, the moment is one of profound uncertainty, in which you've got developments in AI are not as assured or in a kind of linear progression as you might be imagined. And that part of being able to imagine the future is how you shape the present. And imagining a particular future then allows people to integrate forms of AI into their organisations now, but it also contributes towards valuations of companies and various other agendas in the background. So there's a sense of a kind of more definite future, but actually at a time of profound uncertainty where you've got geopolitical tensions playing a part, you've got environmental tensions, not just to do with data centres, but to do with minerals and various other things that are playing out. And that bigger picture to me is one of quite profound uncertainty within which a certain future of the metaverse and AI systems that will do certain things is being projected in order to shape current behaviours and activities.
Yeah. So actually I think what both Davids have said is we actually need a lot of agility in regulation and policy. And actually that's very hard for regulators and policymakers, so I think it's really quite transformational there. But Anna, Édouard, do you want to comment too?
Yes, I'd love to. I think a lot of the big ideas and the problems that we're talking about surface in thinking about skills, because people don't know what they're reskilling for. It's not only understanding what the impacts are, but what are you reskilling for? And so one way perhaps of thinking about it, if I can throw in a perspective from the Institute for the Future of Work, is to think less in terms of skills as they are assessed now at a moment in time by a particular employer or industry, and more about skills and capabilities. So what you're able to do and what you could develop in the future in response. So and a way kind of like of accessing that and thinking about that is to think harder about sort of empowerment and empowerment or participation, that perhaps an individual knows better than anyone else to some extent what they can do, what they're good at, what they want to do, what they have reason to value. And so that can be a way of cutting through at a sort of systems level, like how are we going to set up Skills England? Are they really going to be able to join everything up? At a sort of firm level, can there be slightly more collaborative, co-creative ways of thinking about skills pathways? And at an individual level, what can I do? What can I identify? What do I want to develop in the future that I can and want to imagine?
Thank you. Édouard, do you want to add to that, or?
I agree with you. From my part, I try to not. In French, we say faire des plans sur la comète. C'est really try to imagine the future very precisely. At least at what we do at LaborIA, what I'm sure about is that when we are called by the ministers' teams, we try to bring the subject on the table, so to create dialogue, to give sometimes recommendations on things to do, but predictions, I don't think that we are doing any of those. The idea is really to create the dialogue, because as I said before, even for the success of an AI solution, a big component is the fact that you have dialogue around that subject. And so, yes, I say that I won't go into the future. I foresee it. I'm happy to be in the future, but I have no idea how it will be precisely.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's interesting. So there was questions just a couple of rows behind you, then we'll go to the gentleman with the beard then, and we'll go to the other side if there are any hands up. Yes, there are. Good.
Thank you. I just wonder if you could say a bit about sort of fairness and equity, because the data that these models are trained on is not diverse, it's not equitable, it's a particular set of data from a particular portion of the world, and therefore what impact does that have on the future of using these models in work to be for life to be better or actually for it to make it worse?
Thanks. Who wants to lead on that? Anna, then David? Yeah, maybe? Yeah?
Happy to. I mean, that's again a very good question. And in a sense, it's an old problem that we know that systems, even pre-Gen AI and pre-AI, are trained on data that reflects past patterns of behaviour and resource. Yeah. So therefore, without understanding that and unpicking it, the presumption is that that will be projected into the future. So at this moment in time, we can direct AI, to understand better the patterns of resources and patterns of behaviour so that we can unpick it if we develop systems around that, or it will, on current trajectories, exacerbate some of the things that we found in the past. And maybe that's, in a sense, a problem that's on steroids at the moment, because with people building on sort of foundational AI, it's harder to understand, and so therefore the potential for exacerbating things is more, but also the potential to redirect it, if it's done, is more too. You know, people that are all over the country that may not have had access to thing could use it in a different way, or could be innovative in a different way. There are other problems too in access, but the answer is yes, that is a real problem, and we should all be thinking about it all the time and build it into whatever we're looking at.
Thank you. David, did you want to respond?
So yeah. I mean, the politics around data is the really important thing behind AI, I think, and the training data. And you've got capitalist structures that are based on kind of ownership and control of access to data, and you're seeing some of those things playing out in at the moment. But there's something to add to it, which is that in response to those gaps, the training data is appended with synthetic forms of data. So my colleague Ben Jacobson at York's doing a project on the ethics of data. So what companies will do is they create synthetic data sets that complement or replace their actual real world, if you like, data sets, in order to train the machine learning or whatever on those synthetic forms of data. So if you've got a shortage of data, or you've got a gap in the data, or you don't consider your data to be representative, then you can use algorithms to create a new training data set of synthetic metadata that isn't the real world, isn't generated in the real world, but is still used to train the AI. And that brings with it, and that's one of the things that, like I was saying, Ben Jacobson at the moment is exploring the ethics of attempts to make data sets representative using synthetic data and the consequences that has for then how AI are trained.
Interesting.
So when you train your large language model, you train it to predict the next word. The next word is biased because the word is biased, right? So the AI learns to be biased. Then they add fine-tuning on top, right, where they try to align the AI's values with human values. So, by default, the internet is full of people praising Nazis, right? So by default, if you'd, ask a large language model that wasn't fine-tuned what it thinks of Nazis, it might say some good things. So then they fine-tune it on top, they add the alignment, and they say, this is what you're meant to say when someone asks a question about Nazis. That sounds great. And generally is a good thing. But you do get these issues of power, right, which is who decides what the right answer there is, right? At least if you're just training it on the internet, kind of in some way it's sort of democratic, right, because it's what everyone has written, right, including the things that we don't like, but it's sort of, no one's got the particular power there. But the AI companies have got power doing this alignment. And it's interesting, if you use Grok, which is XAI's, which is Twitter's, which is Elon Musk's thing, then it will say some very different things than what ChatGPT says, because Elon Musk has particular views about what AI, what is a good thing to say that are maybe different from what other companies would say. So that's the sort of the question about be careful what you wish for kind of thing is, okay, we don't want them to be biased, but then who decides what is the right answer, right? I think the good news on that front for me is that it turns out the barriers to developing new AI are not that massive. Now, that's not to say that every academic can do it in their labs, but the data's largely public, the algorithms are public. Now, you need a bunch of money to buy processors, and it probably costs you, $1 billion. But actually, a lot of companies, never mind governments, could afford $1 billion. So at least we can get kind of AIs that's developed by different groups that will have its own different kind of fine-tuning, right? So, China's got the DeepSeek one, which says certain things that China likes, EU, happily has Mixtral. So at least, and countries in the Middle East want to develop their own language models because it's a question of sovereignty. So at least there'll be lots of options with, different people having different, or different companies and different AIs having different views about what the right answer should be.
Interesting, Édouard, and French models too?
French, yes, we have Le Chat de Mistral.
Of course.
Yes, it's not very interesting for you. We've got so much of choices in English, but for the French, we are happy to have Horse, and there was a big promotion during the AI Safety Summit. Mm-hmm. And so, there is a point that the sir mentioned. It was also the fact that a lot of the data came from a part of the globe, of the world, and it orients a lot of the results for everybody, because even in France, the main reference is ChatGPT, and so it's trained mainly with data from Anglo-Saxon countries, so countries that speak the same language than you, so of course it's I don't know if we can call that a bias, but it's not exactly, yes, yeah. I don't know.
Yes, it's an Anglophone bias, if nothing else.
Exactly,
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so of course there is that, and it makes that those models are mainly are more accurate for those countries.
Yeah, indeed, and what David was saying about the Arabic countries is far less data in Arabic, so it's actually far harder to build competent models. But let me turn back to the audience. If we come to this side, gentleman in the white shirt, 3 rows back, and then we'll work back up, if I may. Depends how you count 3. We'll come to the guy with the beard behind next. Thanks.
So I like that you made us think about whether in 7 years there would be superhuman ability to answer questions and to create content. But you then said that is going to revolutionize the world of work. Now, can you say more about that? Because I feel that most jobs are not done if you can just answer questions and create content. There is a lot of actions that I have to take and interactions that I need to perform before my work is done. And do you also foresee that to happen within the next 7 years?
30 years. Who would like to start on that?
I mean, one area is robotics, so the physical stuff. I think it's fair to say this is behind, but the people that I talk to doing this stuff and some of the videos I see do suggest that is coming up. So it's not clear to me that just physical stuff will be something humans can do and AI will only be. But maybe the other thing you're thinking about is kind of agency, right? So the idea that the AI actually kind of performs actions and then sees what happens. So this is another big area in AI. It's called agentic AI. So the AI acting more like a person and going into the world, doing actions, seeing what happens, reflecting on that, and then doing the next thing. So that is really coming on leaps and bounds. There are I forget the word, but benchmarks of like how big of a task can you give an AI and get a reliable answer. And it's something like, each year it increases by 60%. So, right now it can do a 3-minute task quite reliably, but if you keep adding the 60, whatever, very quickly you get to a point where you can sort of say at the beginning of the day, go away and do something that would have taken me a day, and now, come back with the answer. The canonical question is ChatGPT make me $1 million. Right, so, go off into the world, get the $1 million, rob a bank, buy and sell some stuff, whatever, come back with $1 million. So yeah, a lot of work on that.
Yeah, it hasn't brought you $1 million yet, has it?
Not sadly.
Ask me if I want it turned into a pitch pack wherever I've asked it, which is just go on the last question. I don't think we're done at all in work. Most of the evidence is still that it's changing rather than it's going, but we have got to take displacement a lot more seriously, I think, and just kind of like a little bit more insight from recent research on that. Socio-technical skills are actually going up, so even in tech jobs, the kind of combinations of things that are socio as well as technical are going up. This is not very well known and not very well publicised, but comes out of a sort of skills clustering analysis. And again, I'm sort of thinking about our case study on the NHS. This is also a sort of really interesting way of thinking about it. Because some of the capabilities are amazing, that they're coming on in medical things. But our case study in the NHS also found that the systems that are being used, they weren't actually connected with other bits of the NHS. There were kind of significant data and connection problems. A lot of the support staff had very different experiences or views about it, so that the impacts were quite complex. And that a couple of the surgeons, some of the doctors absolutely loved it. And they're the ones probably that we tend to hear about. But a lot of them didn't, and that the training wasn't consistent either. So even if we're definitely in the superhuman area, which we've got to take extremely seriously, there's going to be a transition period which will allow us to shape it to a very large extent.
Okay, thanks. Colleagues, any more?
Hopefully.
That was just one then very brief comment. I mean, the thing about agentic AI that David was mentioning, there's a recent McKinsey report, if you believe them, saying they believe the future of work is agentic AI. So you might find that interesting to look up. But let me turn to the next question, the gentleman there. Thank you.
Anna mentioned accountability and transparency. And the question is how we get those. Because if different AIs make different decisions and we don't know why, they're not transparent. And if they make the wrong decision, who do we take to court? Is it the data center or the programmer or the person who asked the question?
You want to, David?
Yes. That's an interesting question, isn't it? Because one of the things we found was, from the project I mentioned about the housing sector, is that one of the reasons for the kind of hesitancy is because people were worried that the action they were taking wasn't understandable, and therefore it could create problems for them. So they were worried it might make a mistake, or it might treat somebody incorrectly, or it might miss something important about a tenant or a loanee. So there was this kind of hesitance, and in some cases the regulatory kind of frameworks they're responsible to in some parts of the housing sector meant they didn't want to take that risk of not being able to understand the decision that had been made under their umbrella. So people respond in that way. So I suppose at the same time, you get these kind of, you've got advancing forms of artificial intelligence where, to me, the objective is for them to not be explainable. So if you look at something like neural network technology, to me the objective there is to make AI increasingly unexplainable in what it's doing. Because unexplainability is equated with sophistication. And the deep layering of neural networks means that actually the pursuit of explainability within regulatory frameworks is in tension with the direction the technologies are going in.
Interesting. Any other thoughts?
So it's controversial if I haven't been controversial enough.
Please.
My PhD was on decision making. So one thing you never do in decision making research is ask someone why they made a decision, because they'll give you nonsense basically, and you look at people's actions, and then you set up scenarios in a way that you can infer how they made the decisions. Because if we ask someone why did you make your decision, if you ask employers, you've interviewed 6 candidates, 5 of them were female, 1 of them was male, why have you chosen the male? They'll never say, well, because it's a male, right? But just over and over again, you find people choose the male. So, you know, like people won't, like, and I don't think it's that they don't know, I don't think it's that they do know why they've made the decision, but they just don't want to say it. They don't have this self-insight to know that I was influenced by the maleness, the femaleness, and that's why I've made my decision. So my point is, you know, you could argue that we don't really know why humans have made decisions, so why are we so bothered about how the AI makes decisions, right? So again, I said I'm being controversial, right? So there's an argument that, you know, what really matters is trust, right? I don't actually know why that human has made that decision, but I've seen enough decisions that seem to be good ones that I come to trust them. And there's an argument that that's how it could go with AI, right? So at the beginning, you go, how did you make your decision? I mean, you can ask ChatGPT, why did you say that? And it will, like a human, give you a load of nonsense about why it said that, right? That has no relation to why it did say that, because we know why it said it, because it was predicting words. You know, ChatGPT will give you a bunch of nonsense that seems plausible and that might make you feel good about it. But what really matters is when you ask it over and over again, you know, you ask it medical questions and it keeps giving you useful and correct answers, and you check the facts and it turns out those answers are good ones. At some point, you don't really care how it's come to that. The point is, it keeps giving you good answers, and therefore you trust it.
Interesting perspective.
I'd quite like to offer a sort of pseudo-legal, cowboy legal perspective on your question. If a human makes a mistake, and humans definitely make similar kinds of mistakes, and it's that kind of behaviour that has probably originates in or has been part of what data sets that have gone into training that are then you're referring to. But it's also right that a human who makes a mistake will have to, if necessary, appear in front of an employment tribunal judge and explain what they did. And there'll be a set of assumptions about it. And if something isn't clear on the face of things, there'll be an assumption unless it can be rebutted. And that doesn't exist in what you're talking about, an AI and other systems. So I think that there is a trend in governance, in good governance, and in many regulation models all over the world, actually, to move from thinking about the logic of what's going on inside a system. Why do we always have to know exactly why? And think about outcomes more, and also think about bigger systems. Yeah, and why can't we have an overarching system that requires people, responsible people, who whatever they do may have a bearing on significant impacts at work in particular, or on rights, to do what they can to anticipate significant impacts or impacts on regulation, and monitor that and disclose basic information about it. And then on top of that, we could develop potentially very specific, sector-specific or employment-specific or other domains in addition to that. So it might, for example, be reasonable to know with regard for pay, how exactly was that calculated? If that varies, shouldn't we know roughly what the key factors are? Yeah, and if it changes, why that is, and have some course to question or challenge that.
Thank you.
I don't have much to say, just that making things transparent is very hard. Well, for instance, iPhone, it worked great because it was so easy. It's not that you see through the phone, but it's really like, it's that simple that you do things intuitively. For instance, when you start driving a car, everything it's scary because you have the end lever, the clutch, things like that. And then you get used to it and it gets kind of transparent. You don't think of it. You are moving with your car just like you are walking. Of course, not the same speed. So it's an hard question, really. I don't want, we are recorded, so I cannot say, I don't want to say anything more. I just can say that it's hard to have transparency.
Thank you. I think on a different occasion, I'd argue with David about explainability and why we need them for automata as opposed to human beings. But let's not go into that now, because it's more important to turn back to the audience. So some more questions, ladies and gentlemen. So there's a lady on the end, 3 rows down. Sorry, I'm not going to be able to get to everybody. There's I think, too many hands. But we can't go on all night.
How do we balance the environmental impact with AI technologies and its potential to transform the future of work?
to anything? You say you can't really balance it, probably. I mean, it's well reported, the kind of environmental impact. You might find that the processing power gets more efficient over time, but there's going to still be an environmental cost of the data centres and so on that are behind these things. So I would say, just to direct response to the question, I'm not sure you can balance it if you keep rolling out AI at the pace, unless there's drastic changes in the infrastructure of AI that alters the environmental impact of it.
Interesting. Any other views on that?
I have another very controversial view.
Yes.
Yeah, go on, please do.
I think it's totally overblown, the concerns about the environmental impact. So electricity and water, right, they're the two big ones. So there was an interesting article. It said, I forget the precise number, right, but AI is going to use 7 trillion litres of water, or fresh water, something like that. And what a big number, that must be terrible. And then someone else pointed out, well, the almond industry in California uses 8 trillion gallons of water or something, right? So, none of us are sitting here going, oh, the almond industry in California, we need to stop that, it's terrible for the environment. So why are we so worried about AI? Energy is, I think, more of a serious issue, but I just don't think it's that serious. So the projections I've seen are something like all the data centers in the world by 2030 will use sort of 3 to 4% of the world's energy, right? Like, so, 3 to 4%, like, I just don't think it's like that much of a change that this is like beyond human ingenuity to solve. And I think the benefits are so huge. I mean, there's an argument you could make that says, well, if AI makes research faster, then, maybe it will bring clean energy forward by a number of years that will completely offset, or even, more than that, the cost of the energy that it's going to use. So I think it's possibly very overblown.
It's interesting risk-benefit trades there, as you say. But unless we have more comments here, let me turn to some more questions. Not being to the middle, so come down here, gentleman in the white shirt. I'm not biased in terms of white, but it's easy for the roving mics to find.
Hi there. Right. So it goes back. Gustav mentioned the 7 years, and going back to David Stillwell's initial 7 years question. Sorry, can you? Oh, is that better? Okay. So going back to the 7 years and David Stillwell's posing of the 7-year question, I tend to agree that medics may be toast in 7 years, or certainly the average medic may be toast in 7 years. But could the panel comment on whether they think their labs and research groups will be redundant in 7 years? So will you be getting rid of all of your labs within 7 years?
That's a good question. So go on, David. Will sociologists still be needed in 7 years' time?
It's difficult in the current climate to okay. Well, the trouble is, when you start imagining 7 years, is that you start to bring in imagination of an imaginary of the future that's informed by the kind of cultural reference points that we use for imagining the future, which is fictional, films, literature, whatever. These types of images start to shape the way that we then imagine what that will look like, even in something as close as 7 years. So we can all start to imagine the AI reference points in filmic kind of adaptations and stuff like that. So I actually think it's actually quite difficult to even imagine that 7-year period for the reason I mentioned earlier, which is the kind of moment of profound uncertainty, I think, in the way these things will develop, not just the technologies, but also the broader social forces that will act upon the development of those technologies. So I'm going to dodge the direct element of your question for obvious reasons, probably, but answer in that way.
David?
So, I mean, there was a research paper published in Nature, I think. I think it was November, where they tested the AI's ability to come up with good research questions, and they found that it was similar to human researchers in that area. So it's not impossible that it will be able to do a lot of what researchers do. I can also say, in terms of my teaching, I discovered that the students would rather ask ChatGPT questions than they would me. So, and sometimes we go, well, teaching is, it's about putting yourself in the shoes of the student and understanding and empathizing and this kind of thing. But they'd rather talk to something that doesn't have that, because it's not going to judge them. It's not going to say that was a stupid question or anything like that. And, they can ask the question at 3 a.m. or whatever. So yeah, in both in research and teaching, it's not impossible. I think, when I say 7, I think the capabilities may be there in 7 years. Whether the social changes and all that have actually happened to change jobs that much in 7 years, I think is probably pushing it. I think that's probably going to take longer.
Édouard, will LaborIA still be doing what it's doing in 7 years' time?
So just if I understand the question, is if we think we will be replaced in 7 years, that's it, by this AI. I think that, yes, in my team I will be the first one, because I'm not the director, I'm not the researcher, I'm the between the both groups. And if the AI is very powerful enough, I guess, so that I don't want to predict the future, you see. But I'm not necessarily scared, because we have a common coffee machine, and I bring many times the coffee. And so as long that the ChatGPT is not aware of that, I'm good.
Anna?
Perhaps I can adopt David's approach, the controversial David.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
And invite, and I don't know.
I'm surrounded by controversial people now.
And I don't know who in the room, including maybe even the panelists, has used the deep research buttons. And then you may or may not wish to put your hand up. Okay. The deep research capabilities. Yeah. So just us. Very few. So now a few comments. So they are very good, but they do make mistakes, and they're pretty generic. So you can do, for example, multi-areas. I can do it, yeah. Whereas I might formerly have had to, this is controversial, request juniors to do it. So against that background, we have to remember that in R&D, in technology, a lot of that is already, there's a lot of AI doing R&D and technology, and put that together with information that coding jobs actually being the first one to being hit already in headline national statistics. I would take a punt and say that socio-technical research, so mixed research, especially at a more senior level, will absolutely survive and be incredibly important. Also, junior research will, like other occupations, suffer. Probably may, suffer a hit. Thinking on my feet, that's it for now.
Good. Yeah, I very much agree with the socio-technical perspective. I may take Chairman's prerogative for a moment. My group's worked on safety of software-intensive systems for about 40 years. The last 7 years we've worked on safety of autonomy and AI. I think we'll still be doing that in 7 years' time, because effectively the questions about how you protect people's safety in the environment don't go away as the technology evolves. So I think we'll be doing similar things, albeit with different technology in 7 years' time. We've probably got time for 1 or 2 more questions. So there's a hand here, the black shirt, for a change, just to show I'm not too biased.
Thank you. Okay, so I asked Deep Research and ChatGPT 4.5, what in the next 7 years will survive and what won't? Very quickly. Won't. Doctors, clinicians, teachers, coaches, lawyers, compliance officers, and software engineers and AI trainers are out. In are entrepreneurs, therapists, social workers, and anyone who uses empathy. That's it. If you had one job to choose that you could retrain for, what would it be? I'm going to be a carpenter.
Oh. Édouard, do you want to go first?
I have not understood the question. I'm sorry. Too many complicated words.
All right,
not
sorry.
Understood. Sorry.
Colleagues, Havis?
A designer of some sort. Since I'm into policy design and thinking about the future of work as something you design. So as a personal thing, probably design. And I want to correct, when I said socio-technical research, I actually meant social and socio-technical research. And so I want to correct myself from the last question.
Okay.
I think I'll be all right, because Professor of Sociology is, you need a lot of empathy for that, I think. So I think I might be all right. I'm a bit old for professional football now, so I'll go with staying with what I'm doing, I think, on that basis.
OpenAI did some research and say they looked at what are the most common queries, like what do people use ChatGPT for, and number one was therapy. I was asking it questions like I'm stressed or this kind of thing. So even though it doesn't feel empathy, people treat it as if it does. So I wouldn't rely on the therapy thing, the empathy thing. Right now, if you say a job, I would say AI governance, because that's the last thing we're going to want to automate.
Indeed. In fact, there's some recent papers saying that AI governance can't be automated, and after which I very much agree with that. So perhaps one more. Okay, sorry?
No, I was just asking the question to explain. It's which work will be more protected against?
Most protected, yes. So it won't still be there, yeah.
Was it a personal? I might have misread that question. I took it as a personal one rather than a generic one.
Generic, yeah.
Personal was good. Personal was good. Not footballer. Social designer. AI ethicist person, because you can't always make that perfect. What would you do? What would the one job do? If you had to retrain, what would you do?
Boulanger, the one who make the bread and things like that. Because sometimes you call that the hallucination with the AI, and sometimes you make mistakes. And for instance, la tarte tatin. I don't know if you see tarte tatin. I've eaten crumble apple next to the river. It was amazing. It was very good. And so
I'm disappointed. Cocktail waiter, surely.
I know. But for the moment, they still need me. So for 7 years, I won't be a boulanger. But it is an error. It was a mistake. It was an apple pie, la tarte tatin, and by accident she returned it, and then she said, "Okay, I tried this way, and it was good."
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, one more question. I think there was one more. The gentleman in the blue shirt up there. Then I think we'll have to call time.
So we've seen AI be used in business. I saw that the Prime Minister announced this week that they'd generated their own AI model to be used in local authorities for planning permissions and things like that. Should the government be using that, or are they held to a higher responsibility, do you think?
Yeah, so when I hear something like that, I'd be thinking, what does that rollout actually look like when you look at the local authorities, and how do people integrate that system into decision-making processes that are already there, and how do they respond to that experience of integrating? So you hear the story that that's happening, but it'd be interesting to know how that actually works when you look at people responding to its presence within local authorities there, I think.
Colleagues, any further questions? So if not, look, sorry, David, go on. Your final opportunity to be controversial.
I mean, it just makes you think, like, if they need an AI to make the planning decisions, the problem is not the planning decisions. The problem is that the system is too complicated. So, for me, the number one priority should be to simplify it so that we don't need AI. It reminds me of, one of the big uses of AI is to summarize long emails, right? But then the other use of AI is to create long emails, right? It's like I write my bullet points, it turns it big, and then somebody else summarizes it short again. And I think the same thing with planning, right? I hear, they want to build a train line, and the planning, like the papers that are required in planning are like 3 times longer than the actual train line. So these things are being generated for no purpose whatsoever, right? No one's reading this stuff. So for me, like, the whole system needs to be simplified.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, if no more, let me take this opportunity to thank the panelists for the fascinating discussion, and also the audience of some really stimulating questions. Very much appreciate your attending and the contribution and the attention. But I'd like, by way of closing, to call on Joan Concannon, who's the director of the Festival of Ideas. This is the last session this year, although I'm sure 2026 will be even better, right? But Joan, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much. Can you hear me? I'm not sure if this is on, but I think it is. Yes? Excellent. So I just want to say a few thank yous, if you will indulge me for about 1.5 minutes. The first of which is to thank John for chairing so brilliantly, because that was a session where we had so much interaction and input from the audience, and you were all brilliant as well, so thank you so, so much. I was interested in the decision-making logic, because I think one of the reasons we set up the festival in 2011 was the idea of celebrating human ingenuity and ideas. And if universities are about anything, it is about expanding the frontiers of knowledge, but it should also be about sharing it with everybody in terms of what we do, why we do it, why it matters, and who it impacts, and hopefully that it impacts for the public good, as we would say here at the University of York. So that is... it still remains at the heart of why we deliver a festival, a free festival, every year. So I also want to thank all of the donors, because they are the people who enable us to deliver more than 200, we stopped counting at 200 because it's too scary, events over a 13-day period every year. Those donors really believe passionately in the dissemination of knowledge in the most accessible formats. We started on the 31st of May with a sort of generative theme, because it was the history of Doctor who literally the following night regenerated. So that was kind of amusing. And we have finished with the impacts potentially of generative AI. So there's a sort of nice story arc to this year's festival. But we also chose a theme called Making Waves, because in an era of huge complexity, huge turbulence, huge conflict, I think it is really behoven on us as a university to have a festival that enables us to consider in safe environments the sheer level of complexity that we're also living through, but also to celebrate and give some hope and joy about just, in the main part, how brilliant human beings are. And if anything is going to solve complexity, it should be humans working in technological environments, but hopefully the humans will trump, and trump is probably the wrong word. Humans will triumph, and I have ultimate faith in that. So thank you again to our brilliant, brilliant speakers tonight. That was such an interesting storyboard. I have 2 more things to say. Every morning I get up and I empty the dishwasher and I think of Frederick Taylor, because I have a bet with myself that in a time and motion way I can empty the dishwasher with the least amount of movements. So I'm really up for the sociologists in the future. I'm very glad to hear the directors of festivals were not on the list of obsolete functions going forward. But I have to say thank you to Édouard in particular. Blessed be the bread makers. And so thank you to everybody. But my final 2 thank yous are to the 2 most special teams I have the privilege of working with, which are the Festival of Ideas' very tiny team who work their behinds off to make this happen. And they are just so brilliant. And to all of our student festival runners who literally run 1,000 miles a day, running up and down stairs and running around to get speakers and everything else, they are absolutely fantastic. And then there is the festival engine room called the AV team, who have been through everything with us, and we could not manage to do a single thing without them. All of the materials, all of the events that we have done will be on the festival's YouTube channel when they lie down for maybe a day and then start churning their way through editing everything. They are absolutely amazing. And then my final thank you and reminder is we have our brilliant festival partners, Fox Lane Books, outside with all of the remainder of the books for sale this evening, and Kirsty has been an absolute stalwart. And then thank you to all of you for being so brilliant, for coming here on a sunny evening. I dread sunny evenings with a free festival, that you'll all go to the pub. So thank you so much for such brilliant questions, for being such an amazing audience, and we will be back next year. So thank you.